Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Evergrande crisis, the default crisis for the Chinese real estate market. Why it's going to be such a big effect to all of us, probably. Before we begin, if you like this kind of content, like, comment, subscribe, check us out. Definitely look at our Patreon and our other social medias and, be up to date with all this information as it's coming to you. I just need to say something. This isn't financial advice. We don't accept liabilities for losses that you might incur, and everything here is strictly for news and research purposes. So with that in mind, you should be able to enjoy this video. And like I said, today we are talking about the Evergrande default. So they're defaulting on their debt. And why is this such a serious thing? Well, it's because it's a $300 billion real estate giant with, obligations globally. Meaning that they're not just, in China. They're everywhere. And the thing about China is they tend to be very secretive about where their holdings are. Meaning that for me as a Canadian, I know that China has a very deep hand in Canadian real estate. So for me looking at this from that perspective and considering that the Canadian GDP is about 10% real estate, hold on, and let me just get the number out right here. So they said 10% was our GDP, and they said that more than half of Canada's GDP gain was from real estate transactions. So that's pretty big. And I got to actually find the article that tells you the exact percentage of how much of our real estate is in, or how much of our GDP is in real estate. But the last I read, it was 9%, and then another article where it was over 10. But I would like to relink them in the sources for you guys. But the reality is this. The American housing market popped at 4.5%. Canada's market is double or more, and it hasn't popped yet, which for me is an obvious sign, it's a very good sign that we're about to see, it pop. I'm definitely freaked out simply because I know that a large part of our real estate right now is being bought by foreign investment, specifically from, China right now. And if Evergrande defaults, we're going to likely find out how much of it is actually related. So if we don't see any market crashes here in Canada, then the foreign investment isn't as bad as I thought. But if we see the Canadian housing market tank now, we'll know how deep foreign investment was into our country. And that's something that's a little bit scary, because when a $300 billion company starts defaulting on one payment, they're going to start defaulting on all of them. And then that'll result in a bankruptcy and a fire sale. And a fire sale would basically be like them selling everything at below market value by a lot. And if they do that, what happens? The housing market crashes, which is what we saw in, we're about to see 2008 2.0. And that's very scary, because a lot of people, they take bonds, they basically buying government bonds that back their whole thing by real estate. And the thing is real estate's in a bubble. So it's like, this tanking the world's housing market could end up tanking the bond market and other markets that are tied to it. So this is a serious issue, because we don't know how deep Evergrande's roots grow, so to speak. Like, we don't know how deep they're in our economy as a Canadians, but also how deep they are in the global economy. Because a $300 billion firm isn't small. That's big. That's a lot of fucking property. And I'm curious to know what's going to happen here, because they're not making their payments. And what's going to end up happening here is Evergrande defaulting could end up in China either bailing them out, or it could cause like a lot of different things. Like, it could become like a meltdown, which causes the government to bail them out, which then makes Evergrande more of a government entity, which means that potentially they could use it to weaponize, not weaponize, but weaponize economic warfare. I don't know how to explain it, but we don't know exactly where this is going to go. And the thing is, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We don't really know how much bigger this default could get. And the reality is that this is much bigger than the American housing bubble that we saw in 2008. This is $300 billion versus, 2008 alone, the government allocated a $900 billion bailout, basically. So they printed out $1 trillion in 2008, roughly. Imagine what the bailout is going to look like now in 2021 when we just received a $7 or $8 trillion bailout in the States, with another bailout of about between $5 and $10 trillion coming within the Biden administration. And we haven't even factored in what this could potentially do to the global markets, considering that's $300 billion, not just in China, but wherever the hell else they invested into. This could end up a domino effect, because where are all these loans? Like, where is all this debt coming from? Who's loaning who to what? Like, where is everything? The thing is that something like this popping could end up a lot bigger of an issue than just the $300 billion. Because if they default, then that could lead to someone else defaulting. Because right now, everyone's skating on credit, basically. So it's like, this guy's going to pay his interest, which is going to allow us to pay our interest, which is going to allow this guy to pay their interest on something else. But the second one guy doesn't pay their interest on a loan, just their interest, not even the loan, the interest on the loan, that means this guy can't pay that guy, which means that guy can't pay this guy. And then that whole bureaucratic process is just one long domino effect of everyone losing their money. It's a lot of food for thought. And I'm actually genuinely concerned, because I don't personally think that this will be I think this will be something like a flash crash. Meaning, like, we'll see the housing markets tank in a lot of places. And then because of the rate in which we're going to be inflating everything, like through money printing, it'll be a V-shaped recovery, but a V-shaped recovery through inflation, not through purchasing power. So to the people who are buying their houses now at the top, you could get fucked. But the people who have never bought a house before could have the opportunity to buy one, but it won't be a long opportunity. So if the market drops, it's like, this isn't financial advice. If the market drops, that would be the good time to buy, because the rate at which we're going to inflate the dollar in the next 10 years, it's a no-brainer to buy that dip or get yourself into something at that dip, because you'll make your money back through the inflation of having that. Plus, it'll be a physical asset and property. So if the housing market tanks, get in. And to the people that are buying, make sure you lock yourself into a fixed rate. Because if you're on a variable rate right now, and then the government needs to raise their rates to, let's say, make sure that their payments are respected, that'll screw you. I mean, just in my scenario, or like my scenario, in the scenario that I could give that I know the best, let's say a mortgage is about $2,500 at the current interest rate of about 1% right now in Canada, or 1.5%, depending on where you go, or 2% even. If it raises 1%, that's $1,000 extra a month on a mortgage. The average rate is between, let's say, 3% and 4%, or 2.5% and 4%. But the reality is that if it raises a 1.5% or 2% or 2.5%, that's like that's about anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500 or $3,000 extra you have to pay a month, just based off of the current loan to equity ratio and all this stuff. And first of all, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a real estate agent, but I'm wise enough to understand that if the rates raise, and the banks have to raise their rates because the government tells them we have to, because we can't keep interest rates low forever. We can't allow cheap borrowing forever. And you're not fixed at a lower rate. That variable could screw you. And sometimes interest rates could go higher than, let's say, 2.5% or 4%. Let's say we hit a point where they're like, okay, we're going to have to raise rates to 5 or 6%. They're going to juice you and take your property. They're going to screw everybody. This is going to be a huge issue, because the reality is in Canada, who's going to buy that? Who's going to buy that collapse? It's not going to be us. It's going to be the government. And that could end up government subsidized housing, and that could become a seriously ugly issue, because then Canadians won't even be able to own their own fucking property. So it's like they'll put all their money buying the at the market price of housing, just so that they could get in. And then if the market collapses, who are they defaulting their loans to? The banks and the government. So it's like we're in a very tricky situation because right around that time, the liberals came up with this thing called lease-to-own. Hold on. Canadian liberals. And basically the whole premise is that you basically rent the property. Yeah, look at that ugly smile. I'll be straight. I don't like this guy, but we won't say his name. But anyone who's looking at the screen recording will see who his face is because he's an idiot. He wants you to rent to own, which means that you are going to rent a property for X amount of years at whatever the rate they give you. And then after X amount of time, you will be able to buy it. And people are like, oh, that sounds like a dream. That sounds like something really nice. Well, guess what? If interest rates are raising, you won't be able to afford your rent. So let's say you've been paying rent for 3 or 4 or 5, 10 years, and now the interest rates raise and you can't afford it. Now you're not in a position to buy anymore. Now you're in a position where you're about to get thrown out of your house because you can't afford your rent. And then everything you've put into the house, guess what? Because it's rent to own or lease to own, what ends up happening is that everything you put in as a down payment for your house no longer counts. It means they could just throw you out on the fucking street and whatever you put into the house, it doesn't count. It's not your house. You were leasing with the potential to own after X amount of years. So this is a way bigger issue when you're factoring in all these things together. And that's actually like when I wrap these things together in my speculative head, and then I realize how ugly this potential program could be just based off of what I'm looking at. I hope I'm wrong. I genuinely hope I'm wrong. I pray to whatever fucking God or universe or whatever is listening that I'm wrong. Because if I'm right, and they pop the housing market and everyone loses their homes, and then the government buys the homes because it's going to be the safest option, then they're going to be in a position where they're going to tell people, hey, rent to own. And then you know what? No one's ever going to own anything. You know why? Because every time you get to a point where you could potentially buy it, the government's going to raise rates and they're going to take it from you. And because you're leasing, none of the money you put down equivalates to your mortgage or your debt or your equity or anything. Basically, they're about to set up a perpetual cycle where you won't be able to own anything unless you own it right now. And that's kind of scary. And I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. But if I'm right, this is something that's like really ugly. And we should not be re-electing these guys that I'm highlighting, because that's the kind of world that they want to give. They want to make it so that everyone rents from the government, probably. And I personally don't think that that's correct, because I've seen government housing. I've lived next to it. I've seen dumpster piles that stretch as long as a city block of mattresses and garbage, and it stinks. And the government didn't pick it up for 4 or 5 months. It was a stinky summer garbage dump pile next to my fucking house. So when I think about government housing and how they treat government housing, and then I compare the government housing that I grew up next to compared to, a bad landlord, I'll still take the bad landlord, because I'll go find a better one somewhere else. Whereas government housing, once they own it, it's done. You're fucking set. Whatever dump pile they put next to your house, you live next to it. Good fucking luck. So with that in mind, I'm going to wrap up this video because it was a pretty passionate video. And, I hope you take these words to heart. But at the same time, too, just remember I'm just some dude who's reading things online and bringing you these educational videos, providing you your research and news. If you stayed to the end, sub to our Patreon, like, comment, subscribe, check out all of their social medias. Keep your eyes peeled for the Discord because that's coming in Q1 of next year. Take care.